My mother married into the Kensington family, and on the very first night, my new stepbrother pinned me against the wall of a house that wasn't mine and told me, low and mean, that I'd better learn to be invisible. His name was Aeneas Kensington. He was going to make my life a certain kind of hell. What neither of us knew yet was that it would take him about a year to figure out the hell was mostly his. The house had 41 rooms. I counted them the way you count exits. I'd learned that habit young in shelters, in the back seats of cars that didn't belong to us, in the apartments my mother and I got evicted from with the regularity of seasons. You walk into a new place and you find the doors. You find where the light switches are. You find out whose house it is, because it is never, ever yours. The Kensington estate was the first place I'd ever stood in where I couldn't find the edges of it. "Stand up straight, Elliot." My mother pinched the back of my arm, smiling the whole time at the man beside her. "For God's sake, you look like you're about to run." I was. I always was. Gerald Kensington was gray at the temples and generous in the way rich men are generous when it costs them nothing. A hand on my shoulder, a warm welcome to the family, son. A smile that didn't reach anywhere important. My mother had met him 8 months ago at a charity gala she'd talked her way into. She'd been a coat check girl. She'd left with his phone number. She was very good at that, leaving with the thing she came for. "And this," Gerald said, turning, "is my son, Aeneas." I looked up. "I want to tell you I knew, right then, that he was going to ruin me, that some current went through the floor. That's how the story goes when someone tells it later, all soft focus and inevitable. The truth is, he looked at me the way you look at a stain on something you own." Aeneas Kensington was 20, 2 years older than me. He had his father's height, and none of his warmth dark hair pushed back off a face that belonged in an advertisement for something you couldn't afford, a jaw like a closed door, eyes the pale, exhausted gray of a winter sky that has decided not to snow just to spite you. He didn't shake my hand. He looked at my shoes. They were the good ones, the only good ones. My mother had bought them the day before with Gerald's card, and they still had the stiffness of things that haven't learned your feet yet. "He can take the east guest room," Aeneas said, "to his father, not to me. It's furthest from mine." Then he walked away. "He's shy," Gerald said, which was the funniest thing anyone had ever said in that house, and none of us would know it for months. The first week, he didn't speak to me at all. This is a specific kind of cruelty, and rich people are very good at it. Not a slammed door, a closed one. I'd come down to breakfast and the room would go quiet, the exact amount that told you it had been about you. I'd reach for the coffee and his hand would already be there, and he'd take the whole pot and pour 1 cup and leave. The staff learned fast. Staff always learned fast. They have to. It's the same instinct I had. Within days, the housekeeper had stopped meeting my eyes. The driver forgot me twice. Someone moved my things from the east guest room to a smaller one over the garage, and when I asked, no one had done it. No one knew. It had simply happened the way weather happens. I knew who'd done it. I didn't say anything. You learn, growing up, the way I grew up, that saying something is a luxury. It's for people who'll be believed. The room over the garage had a slanted ceiling and a window that looked at a wall. I unpacked my 2 boxes. I found the exits. There was one, and it was the door, and I lay on the narrow bed and listened to the enormous house breathe around me and thought, this is fine. This is a roof. You have had worse, and you have wanted less. Around midnight, the door opened without a knock. He filled it. He always filled doorways. It was a talent, taking up the whole of an exit so you understood, at an animal level, that you weren't getting past him unless he moved. "You're not going to last," Aeneas said. I sat up. I didn't turn on the light. Some part of me understood already that he was easier to survive in the dark when I couldn't see how much better than me he thought he was. "Okay," I said. That threw him. I could hear it, the small hitch, the recalibration. He'd come up here for a fight and I'd handed him nothing, and boys like him hate nothing because nothing gives them no purchase. "My father feels sorry for you," he said. "That's all this is. He collects sad things. Your mother figured that out, and now here you are, sleeping over my garage. He let that sit. Don't get comfortable. People like you don't get to stay. People like you." I'd heard it my whole life, in 40 variations. "Okay," I said again. He stood there a moment longer. Then, and I've thought about this a lot, after, when I knew everything he said, quieter, almost like it was pulled out of him against his will, "Why aren't you scared of me?" It wasn't a question. He didn't want an answer. He was asking himself. He left before I could not give him one. Here's what I understood about Aeneas Kensington in the first month, before I understood anything real. He was the sole heir. His mother had died when he was 9. A car, a wet road, a story he never told, and I only pieced together from portraits and silences. Gerald had never remarried. For 11 years it had been the two of them and the 41 rooms, and Aeneas had grown up as the single fixed point of an entire fortune's gravity. Everything in that house had one purpose. It would be his. And then a coat-check girl and her quiet nobody son had walked in and started rearranging the furniture. I didn't blame him for hating me. I want that on the record. If I'd been the prince of that cold, beautiful place, and something had come to take a piece of it, I'd have hated me too. What I didn't understand, what took me an embarrassingly long time to understand, was that he never once acted like I was going to take a piece of the money. He acted like I was going to take something he hadn't known was his until I showed up. School started. Of course we went to the same one. It was the kind of school with a Latin motto and a waiting list, and boys whose fathers had wings of buildings named after them. My mother had made sure of it before the wedding. Elliot's education had been a line item in whatever negotiation got her the ring. Aeneas was a god there. I don't use the word loosely. He moved through those halls and the halls arranged themselves. People laughed a half second before his jokes landed. Girls I'd never speak to knew his coffee order. He was captain of a rowing team and something with a debate trophy and the single most beautiful bored person any of those hallways had ever produced. And I was the stepbrother. That was the word that got around. Kensington's stepbrother. Said with a little curl at the edge, because everyone knew the story by then. The coat-check girl. The sudden wedding. The boy who slept over the garage. In a school built on bloodlines, I was a rumor with legs. He made it worse on purpose. Not with his fists. He was too smart for that. Fists leave marks, and marks raise questions. He did it with the thing rich boys do best, which is arrange the world so you fall down in it and it looks like you tripped. A study group I was assigned to dissolved by lunch. A locker that jammed with something sticky I couldn't afford to replace the contents of. A whisper campaign so light and deniable I could never point to a single sentence. Only the total. By October, nobody at that school would sit next to me, and everyone knew exactly why, and no one had technically done anything. You could just apologize to him, a girl told me once, kindly, in the way people are kind when they're glad it isn't them. Whatever you did. I didn't do anything, I said. She looked at me like I'd said something naive. In her world, you didn't get treated like this for nothing. There was always a reason. The reason was just usually money. She was closer to right than either of us knew. There was a reason. It just wasn't the one anyone could see. The thing you have to understand about surviving is that it's boring. That's the part they never tell you. Enduring isn't dramatic. It's small and gray and mostly about not reacting. I got very good at not reacting. I did my work. I got my grades better than his, quietly, which I suspect bothered him more than anything. I ate my meals fast and early to miss the family dinners, where my mother performed a devoted wife and Gerald performed a generous man, and Aeneas sat at the far end of the table performing ice. I made myself small. I made myself efficient. I made myself the kind of person a house forgets is in it, and every few nights, the door over the garage would open without a knock. He never had a good reason. That was the thing. He'd stand in the doorway and say something cruel. My father asked about you today. I told him you'd settle in once you understood your place, and then he wouldn't leave. He'd linger in the dark like the words were an excuse he'd already used up, and now he was just there, breathing my air, taking up my one exit. Do you need something? I asked him once. 3rd week of October. I was tired. Tired makes you brave in stupid ways. No, he said. Then why do you keep coming up here? Silence. The house ticking around us. And then he crossed the room in 3 strides, and I thought, clearly and without much fear, okay. This is the part where he finally hits me, and he took my chin in his hand and tilted my face up into the thin light from the window that looked at a wall. His thumb was on my jaw. His hand was cold. He looked at me like I was a math problem he was losing. You look at everyone like you're about to leave, he said. Like none of this is real to you. Like we're not real to you. His grip tightened, just slightly. It's insulting. You want me to be scared of you, I said. I want you to look at me like I'm... He stopped. His jaw worked. Whatever came next, he swallowed it whole, and it must have tasted terrible, because his eyes did something then that I'd never seen an eye of his do. They went red at the rims, bright and sudden and furious, like the humiliation of it was a physical thing crawling up his throat. He let go of my chin like it had burned him. He was at the door before I'd taken a breath. Lock this, he said, not turning around. Anyone could just walk in. The irony of that instruction, from the one person who never once knocked, was so enormous I almost laughed. I didn't. I locked it. The lock didn't work. He'd made sure of that back in September, when he'd had my things moved. I found out later he knew. He told me to lock a door he'd personally broken. I think that was the first time I understood he wanted me to stay somewhere he could reach. Winter came down over the estate like a lid. Snow made the 41 rooms feel smaller and colder both at once, which I hadn't known was possible. Gerald traveled for work. He was always traveling for work, which was, I'd come to realize, the load-bearing wall of my mother's whole plan. A rich, absent husband is the easiest kind to manage. My mother took his absences as invitations, redecorating, a new car, a personal assistant named Damien who I didn't like and couldn't say why. I kept my head down. I counted the days until I could apply to universities far away, in cities I could disappear into, where nobody would know I was Kensington's stepbrother, where I could be a person instead of a rumor. I made the mistake of saying it out loud. Not to him, never to him. To my mother. At breakfast, when I thought we were alone, I want to go somewhere for school, far, maybe abroad. My mother's fork paused. Something crossed her face that I had learned to fear, a flatness, a recalculation. "Don't be dramatic," she said. "You'll go where it's useful for you to go." "Useful for me?" "Useful," she said, and smiled, and did not clarify. And I felt the old floor tilt under me, the understanding, familiar as a bruise, that I was not a son to her. I was an asset. I'd always been an asset. She'd carried me through the shelters and the evictions, the way you carry a lottery ticket you haven't scratched yet. I didn't hear the door. I never heard him. He moved like the cold. But when I looked up, Aeneas was in the doorway, and his face had gone very still, and I understood he'd heard the whole thing, far, maybe abroad, somewhere I could disappear. He didn't say anything. He got his 1 cup of coffee. He left. That night, the door over the garage opened without a knock, and he didn't stand in the frame. He came all the way in, and he shut it behind him, and in the dark, his voice was wrong, stripped of the bored music it always had. "You're leaving. It's a year away. More." "You're planning to leave?" he said, planning like an accusation, like I'd been caught. "You've been here 4 months, and you've already got 1 foot out the door. You never even..." He stopped. Started again, lower. "You never even tried to want it here." "Want it here." I sat up. Something in me, 4 months of not reacting, of small and gray and efficient, cracked clean down the middle. You had my things moved over the garage. You made an entire school treat me like a disease. You come up here every other night to remind me I don't belong, and now you're upset? I believed you? The dark was total. I heard him move, felt the mattress dip. "You weren't supposed to believe me," he said, and then his hand was in my hair, not gentle, never gentle, gripping, and his forehead came down against mine, and I could feel him shaking, this god of the beautiful halls, this boy who owned the whole world in advance, shaking in the dark over the garage like something was being torn out of him by the root. "You weren't supposed to believe me, Elliot," he said again, wrecked. "You were supposed to fight back. You were supposed to make me. You were supposed to give me a reason to keep." He didn't finish it. He didn't have to. I understood, all at once, and far too late, that every locked door cruelty of the last 4 months had been a boy who did not have the language for wanting, using the only vocabulary he'd ever been given: possession. He didn't know how to keep something without caging it. Nobody had ever taught him. His mother had died, and his father had loved him like an investment, and the only thing anyone had modeled for him was, "This is mine, this is mine, this is mine." He'd been trying to make me his, the only way he knew how. And it had turned out this is the part that undid us both, that you cannot cage a person who has spent his whole life finding the exits. I'd found his months ago. I was already gone, in every way that mattered, which was, of course, exactly why he couldn't let go. "Say something," he said, against my mouth, not kissing me, just there, breathing my air, taking up my only exit like he always had. "You always just say okay. Don't say okay." I could feel his pulse where his wrist pressed my throat. Fast, human, afraid. "You broke my lock," I said. A terrible, breaking open sound, half a laugh, half something else. "I know. So I couldn't keep you out. So you couldn't," his voice cracked in the middle. "So you couldn't leave without me knowing." We stayed like that a long time. 2 boys who'd been taught the wrong words for the right feeling, forehead to forehead in the dark, not crossing the last inch because the last inch was the thing that couldn't be uncrossed. And we both knew what we were. And we both knew what the house downstairs would call it. He left before dawn. He didn't say anything else. But in the morning, there was a new lock on my door, a good one, and a key, and no note, because he didn't have the words. But I understood it anyway. Now you can keep me out. I need you to be able to, and I need you to choose not to. I didn't use it. I want that on the record too. We didn't talk about it. That's not avoidance, or it is, but it's the functional kind. We were stepbrothers. We were legally, on paper, in the eyes of the state and the school and my mother and his father, family. There was a marriage certificate that made us relatives and a whole social architecture built to enforce it. Whatever the door over the garage had cracked open, the daylight sealed it back up because the daylight had rules and the rules had teeth. So in public, nothing changed. He was still cold. I was still invisible. He'd walk past me in the halls without a flicker, and I'd let him. And it was the easiest performance in the world because we'd both been performing our whole lives, him as ice, me as absence. But the cruelty stopped. Not all at once. Quietly, the way the moving of my things had been quiet. A study group reformed, and no one dissolved it. My locker stopped jamming. A boy sat next to me at lunch and lived to tell about it. The whisper campaign didn't reverse, you can't unring that bell, but it starved, because its source had gone quiet, and rumors need feeding. And at night, the door opened without a knock, and now when he came in, he didn't stand in the frame. I could show you 100 of those nights, and they'd all be the same and all be different. Him on the floor with his back against my bed, talking, actually talking, in that low, stripped voice, the bored music gone, about his mother in pieces over weeks, about his father who'd never once come to a single race Aeneas rode, who signed cards a personal assistant bought, about the specific loneliness of being the future of something enormous and the present of nothing at all. Everyone in that school would trade places with me, he said one night. Late February. Snow at the window that looked at a wall. You know that? Every one of them. They think I have everything. You do have everything, I said. Not cruel, just true. I have things. His head tipped back against the mattress. I could feel the weight of it through the frame. You're the only person in that entire house who ever looked at me like I was a person and not a he. He gestured at the dark, at the 41 rooms below us, at all of it. An inheritance with a face. I looked at you like I was about to leave. You said it was insulting. It was. A pause. It still is. Don't what? Don't leave, he said, so simply, so without armor, that it stopped my breath. That's all. That's the whole thing I keep coming up here to say, and I keep saying it wrong. Don't apply abroad. Don't disappear into a city. Don't, his hand found mine in the dark, blind, sure. Cold, like always. I'll make it worth staying. I don't know how yet, but I'll figure it out. Just don't decide you're a guest here. You're not a guest. What am I? He was quiet for a long time. Mine, he said finally, and then, hearing it, hearing how it sounded, how it was the exact wrong word again, the caging word, the only word he had, he laughed, low and broken. God, I did it again. I don't know how to say it without. I know, I said, and I did. That was the thing. I'd learned to read him the way I read houses, found the exits, found the light switches, found out that the coldest boy in the beautiful halls was a locked room with someone trapped inside, and the someone was him. Say it back, he said. Whatever the right word is, say it back. Yours, I said, because it was his word, and I'd give him his word, but not caged. Yours, because I'm choosing it. There's a difference, and you're going to learn it. I felt him go still. Teach me, he said. Spring came, and with it, my mother's real plan came out of the ground like something that had been waiting under the frost. I should have seen it sooner. I'd spent my whole life reading her. She was the first house I ever learned to find the exits in, and I'd let the strange warmth of that winter make me careless. But my mother was never careless. My mother was a coat check girl who'd married 41 rooms, and you don't do that by accident. Here's what she'd been building, while I was learning the difference between mine and chosen in the dark over the garage. Gerald traveled. Gerald signed what was put in front of him, because Gerald was the kind of rich man who'd stopped reading the fine print decades ago that was staff's job, and staff, increasingly, answered to my mother. Damien, the personal assistant, wasn't a personal assistant. Damien was a lawyer. Over 8 months of marriage, in the gaps between Gerald's flights, my mother had quietly been moving the load-bearing walls of the entire Kensington fortune, powers of attorney, restructured holdings, a trust with her name, where names mattered. She was hollowing the house out from the inside, and she was doing it with the patience of a woman who'd waited her whole life to be on the inside of a house worth hollowing. And I was the last piece. I found out the way you always find out the important things by accident through a door not fully closed. Her voice and Damien's in the study, and my own name in the middle of it. The Ashford boy, Damien was saying. The family's old money, cash poor now, but the name is worth. Elliot will do it, my mother said. Flat, certain, the voice she used for done things. He's biddable. He's spent his whole life being told where to stand. A little engagement, a joining of names. It consolidates everything before Gerald's lawyers wake up. By the time anyone notices, it's structural. And the son? Aeneas? A pause. I could picture her smile, the one she used on Gerald, the one she'd been using on the world since before I was born. Aeneas Kensington, my mother said, is a spoiled boy who hates my son and can't hide it in front of a single dinner guest. Nobody will believe he'd lift a finger for Elliot. That's the beauty of it. The one person in this house who might defend the boy has spent all year making it public record that he'd sooner see him gone. A soft laugh. I raised Elliot to be furniture. I've spent 18 years teaching him he's a guest anywhere he stands. He'll do exactly what he's told, because he doesn't know how to do anything else. I stood in the hall on the good shoes that had finally learned my feet, and I understood 2 things at the same time. The first was that my mother had just described exactly and cruelly the boy I'd been for 18 years. Furniture, a guest, biddable, someone who says, okay. The second was that she'd built her entire plan on a version of me that had died in the dark over the garage sometime that winter. When a boy who didn't know the words held my face in his cold hands and asked me to teach him the difference between owning and choosing. She thought Aeneas hated me. She'd staked the whole fortune on it. She'd read the performance and missed the play. I didn't tell him at first. Old habit. Saying something is for people who'll be believed, and even then, even after the winter, some cellar-deep part of me still wasn't sure. He'd spent 4 months teaching an entire school. I was a disease. Maybe the nights over the garage were their own kind of performance. Maybe I was about to trade one cage for the fantasy of a different one. So I did what I'd always done. I found the exits. I made copies of what I could reach. Damien got careless with a briefcase, and I'd been invisible in that house so long I could stand at a man's shoulder and read his screen, and he'd never know a guest had been in the room. I built the record my mother had been careful never to leave. Powers of attorney, the Ashford correspondence, a trust with her name where a name shouldn't be. And I made a plan to disappear with it, because that was the only ending I knew how to write for myself. The exit, taken quietly, alone. He caught me packing. Not the door over the garage, the closet, midday, a bag on the bed, and him in the doorway filling it the way he always had, except his face wasn't cold now. His face was the worst thing I had ever seen it do. You're leaving. Barely a voice at all. Aeneas. You made me a key. He said it like it was the cruelest thing anyone had ever done to him. And God help me, coming from a boy who'd been loved like an investment his whole life. Maybe it was. You said yours because I'm choosing it. You said, and now you're... He crossed the room. He took the bag out of my hands, not gently, and his hands were shaking, cold as ever, and he looked at me with his eyes going red at the rims. You're doing it again. You found the exit. You always find the exit. I broke your lock so you couldn't. Listen to me. I took his face in my hands the first time I'd ever done it. Always him, never me, and the shock of it stopped him cold. I'm not leaving you. I'm leaving her before she can use me. Aeneas, my mother is emptying your house. He went very still. I told him all of it. The study, the not quite closed door, Damien the lawyer, the Ashford boy, the trust, the 18 years of being raised as furniture for exactly this moment. I told him the load-bearing wall of the whole plan. Nobody will believe Aeneas Kensington would lift a finger for Elliot. He's made it public record all year that he'd sooner see the boy gone. I watched it land. I watched a boy who didn't have the words find, at last, a thing he understood perfectly, because it was his native tongue. Someone was trying to take what was his. She thinks you hate me, I said. The whole plan is built on it. Every cruelty you performed this year, every hallway you walked past me, she's been keeping receipts, and they all say the same thing. And the thing they say is, these two are enemies. I held his cold face in my warm hands. You made me invisible so well that my own mother can't see you'd burn the world down for me. That's the plan, Aeneas. Your ice is her alibi. He was quiet for a long moment. And then something moved behind his winter gray eyes. Something I'd only ever seen the edges of. The thing that had made an entire school arrange itself around him. The thing that was going to be terrible and beautiful to watch, pointed, for once, at someone who deserved it. So let's use it, Aeneas Kensington said, and smiled for the first time in a way I felt in my teeth. Let her keep her receipts. Let her build the whole thing on me hating you. He turned my hand over, pressed his mouth to the palm-cold lips, the only warm thing in him, the words. And then, let's find out what happens to a plan when its load-bearing wall walks into the room and tells the truth. You'd have to do it publicly, I said. In front of your father. In front of everyone. You'd have to stop performing ice. You'd have to let the whole world see I stopped. There's no undoing that. They'll know about us. He looked at me like I'd said the most obvious thing in the world. Elliot, he said, I have spent a year making sure the whole world thinks I'd never lift a finger for you. Do you understand what it's going to do to her when I lift both of them? Here is how it ended. Because the beginning and the middle were slow and cold and quiet, and the end was neither. Gerald came home. My mother had timed it for a dinner, a real one, the kind with guests, because her plan needed witnesses of the right kind. The Ashfords, old money and cash poor and hungry. A judge she'd cultivated. 2 of Gerald's associates who'd stopped reading fine print around the same time he had. She'd dressed me for it. She'd told me where to stand. She'd leaned close in the hall and murmured the sentence she thought would work on the furniture she'd raised. "Smile tonight, Elliot. Something wonderful is about to happen for you." I smiled. I was very good at smiling on command. She'd taught me herself. The Ashford boy was pleasant and vacant and had no idea he was a receipt. My mother steered the dinner with the ease of a woman steering a thing she'd built. Gerald beamed, oblivious, generous, a man being robbed at his own table who thought he was hosting a party. Damien sat at the far end with a briefcase that I knew, because I'd copied its contents, held the papers that would make it all structural before anyone's lawyers woke up, and Aeneas played ice. God, he was good. He was better than he'd ever been. He was so cold to me across that table, a curled lip, a bored eye, a comment about the stepbrother who'd never learn his place, that I watched my mother's shoulders loosen with satisfaction. Her alibi was performing beautifully. The one person who might defend the boy was on the public record, right there, in front of the judge and the Ashfords, and Gerald himself being exactly the enemy she needed him to be. She let Damien open the briefcase over dessert. "Gerald," she said, warm, wifely, "there's just a small matter of paperwork. Nothing that can't wait. But the Ashfords are eager, and I thought a toast, first, to family, to the joining of 2 great names." She lifted her glass. She looked at me, and her smile was a locked door with something hungry behind it. "To Elliot, and the future we've arranged for him." And Aeneas Kensington set down his glass and stood up and stopped performing ice. I have never seen a room change temperature so fast. "Sit down," he said to my mother. Not loud. He didn't need loud. He was, I realized watching it, about to be the thing that entire school had always arranged itself around, except now the whole terrible gravity of him was pointed at one person, and she'd built her fortune's theft on the belief that it never would be. "Aeneas," Gerald started, "this isn't... Dad." He didn't look away from her. "In about a minute, you're going to want to hear this, so I need you to sit down too." He turned to the briefcase, to Damien, who'd gone the color of the tablecloth. "Open it, all the way. Show my father what he's been signing." "Aeneas," my mother said, and her voice was still smooth, still certain, still steering. "This is exactly the behavior I've had to manage all year. He hates the boy, Gerald. Everyone's seen it. He'd say anything to, I'd say anything." Aeneas agreed. "That's true. You did your homework. A whole year of it. You've got receipts on me going back to September. Every hallway, every dinner, every time I made sure the world knew I couldn't stand the sight of him." He smiled, and it was the smile I'd felt in my teeth. And I watched my mother finally see the play behind the performance. 1 full second too late. "You built the whole thing on it. Nobody will believe Aeneas Kensington would lift a finger for Elliot." Silence. Total. The judge's fork suspended in the air. "Say it back to her, Elliot," Aeneas said, not looking away from my mother, holding out his hand across the table, his cold hand, palm up, in front of the Ashfords, and the judge and his oblivious robbed father and God and everyone. The word. You know the one. I took his hand, warm palm to cold, in front of all of it. "Yours?" I said. "Because I'm choosing it."